So this is the end result of my painting. I am sure you guys did so good, and I would love to see how everyone's turned out. Hello everyone, welcome. Thanks for joining me today for some watercolor painting. My name is Anna Maria. I'm an artist, all-around crafter, and the owner of Arteria, a craft store and boutique in sunny Los Angeles. Before we begin, we would like to thank Shapermint for their support through the awesome Here For You initiative. We are thrilled to contribute and be a part of it. It is such a great way for us all to stay connected, get creative, and maybe learn something new while we are staying at home. All right, let's get to it. We are going to be using the following supplies today. Watercolor paints, any kind will do. Brushes, soft bristle brushes work best. Watercolor paper, if you don't have that, the thickest kind of paper you find. A palette or a dish or saucer. A cup of water to wash our brushes in. A paper towel or an old rag or towel that you don't mind getting stained. A pencil, an eraser, and a blow dryer to speed things up. And these are the 4 steps we will follow. First, we will be drawing in pencil. Then we will do a flat wash to get rid of the white of the paper. We'll do wet on wet next to shade and add depth. And lastly, we'll do dry brush to add all our final details. We will start out by lightly drawing the outline and key details in pencil. I'm doing a cactus today. I'm starting by drawing out my pot, and then I'm doing a prickly pear cactus, so I'm adding several different parts and leaves. I can erase the lines if I want. After, make them a little light. I'm adding a little dish at the bottom with some pebbles. I think it'll be a nice touch, add some color. You could also leave your lines darker and, even outline them at the end with a pen if you like. So now we're ready to get our painting on. My rule of thumb is if anything's larger than a dollar coin, you don't want to paint straight from your cakes. So you want to build color in your palette first. So I'm going to add some water, get my greens. You definitely want to do this if you're mixing colors, of course. You don't want to muddle your cakes. And if you aren't very familiar with what your watercolors look like, you always want to test on a little piece of paper and make sure that the color is the way you want it to be. Once I have enough paint for the whole area I'm going to cover, I'm going to start laying down my flat wash. You always start working from the lightest color in your painting to the darkest, but I just want to get rid of the white and just create an even flat layer of color all around. I have to move fast so that the paint doesn't dry, so it really ends up looking very even. And I'm just going to do this all over my prickly pear leaves in this green. Once I am done laying this down, I'm going to let it dry. I can always speed it up with my blow dryer if I want to in a high heat, medium speed setting, or I can give it a little time and wait. Watercolor does require a little more time and patience than other mediums. What I definitely don't want to do is go paint something right next to this while it is still wet because the colors will definitely bleed into one another. Now that I'm done with my green, I'm going to start working on my pot. I'm going to do a cool blue and red effect. So I'm going to start with my blue. I'm going to lay down a little bit of a gradient wash, a little darker on top, softer on the bottom. And then I'm going to jump right into our second technique, which is wet on wet, and lay some very wet red paint on my wet paper and make it bleed all out for a really cool glazed drippy effect. Just moving it around, wetting my brush a little bit more, adding a little bit to my back edge. My green is dry enough so I could get close enough to that with no problem. Adding a little bit more blue, making it darker. And now I can go back up to my green, re-wet it, and start putting down some more color. I definitely want to keep in mind where I want my light source to come from, where I want it to be a little darker. I'm going to try to imagine that the light sort of comes from my top left corner, so I'm going to try to shade this right side a little bit more. And then I'll do the same thing with my other prickly pear leaves in the bottom of my pot. So just plopping down little bits of green all over. I can even move it around and lift it and make the paint go where I want it to go. If I want to shade one side more. Just got to keep adding this to all my little leaves. Definitely trying to make them a little darker on the right side of the cactus and a little more on the bottom as well. All of this is wet on wet. You can pick up some of it with your brush if it gets too wet. Adding a little darker green, shading a little bit more. Trying to make it look very 3D. And now I'm going to start doing some dirt in my pot. So I'm basically doing our third technique, so dry brush. I'm just basically making my brush very dry and scraggly and just doing little dots all over. I'm still trying to stay away from the green a bit. It may be kind of wet. And now I'll dry it a little with my blow dryer just to speed everything up. I definitely don't ever want to blast it at full speed because it may splash a little bit if it's too wet. But holding it up and moving it in the direction I want the water to go helps a lot too. Now it is nice and dry. I'm going to start adding some color to these cool pebbles at the bottom. I think I want some of them to look more like pebbles, some a little bit more like crystals even. Just a nice touch at the bottom, sitting on the edge of the saucer. A little more detail in the dirt as well. Basically lots of little dots to make it look like there's pebbles in the surface of our pot. Trying to shade it a little bit more too towards the back and towards the front of the pot and at the bottom of the prickly pear cactus. I'm just going to use several different browns, some black, a little bit of blue here and there even. And when I do dry brush, I always want to test it on my paper towel, make sure it's not very, very wet. Just, sort of the consistency of a felt tip marker so I can get tiny, tiny details. I'm also trying to hold my brush very upright for the most part. Now I'm adding some color to my dish. I want it to be a light gray, but I'll come back and shade a little more. Shading a little bit more here on the side of my pot. Again, always trying to keep my shade on the bottom part and sort of the right side because I want my light to come from the left. And now I'm adding a little flower here. I know I didn't really draw it at the beginning, but these flowers are very forgiving. A little more dirt, a little more detail. All of this is dry brush. Definitely want to do dry brush at the end. You don't really want to melt it and go over it after you've done these darker colors because it'll all remelt. So again, lining a little bit, adding a little bit more shadow to the bottom of my dish so it doesn't look very flat. It actually does look more 3D. And now I'm mixing greens and browns together, testing again on my paper towel. And then this is a really good color for all of my little thorns and needles. So holding my brush really, really upright and barely touching the paper, I'm doing these little groups of 3s all over for my thorns and needles. And I definitely want some of them to stick out the side a little bit of the cactus so that they're just not laying on the front. They're also sort of going all around. They actually give that idea that it's very prickly. And that's it. We are all done with this cactus. So this is the end result of my painting. I am sure you guys did so good, and I would love to see how everyone's turned out. If you want to share, you can use #HereForYou or tag me at ArteriaLA on Instagram so we can all see your awesome creations. Thank you so much for joining us today, and thanks again to Shapermint and their rad #HereForYou initiative. And don't forget, guys, stay positive, keep in touch with your communities, and please share this content if you found it useful. We are all in this together.